power was never naked, it was always clothed in symbol. And in the oldest depictions of gods, kings, and initiates, you will almost always find one thing held in their hand: a rod, a staff, a line. Not just ornament, not just support, but an axis. Egypt, Sumer, Babylon, India, Greece, from Osiris to Enki, from Hermes to Moses, they all held the same shape. A long, vertical staff, sometimes straight, sometimes entwined with serpents, sometimes crowned with circles, discs, or animals. Why? Why would beings of immense power carry a rod? Because the rod was not for walking, it was for anchoring. It was not a tool, it was a declaration that the bearer stood between worlds, that they were the axis, that they could bridge the visible and the invisible and command both. In Egypt, the Wa's scepter was the symbol of dominion not over people, but over order itself. The bearer of the rod was not just ruler, he was the stabilizer of reality. In Mesopotamia, the gods were said to measure the fate of cities using reed rods, not to build but to align, to bring divine geometry down into form. And in the Hebrew tradition, the staff of Moses parted seas and summoned serpents, not through trickery, but through resonance. Because the staff was not dead wood, it was alive with intention, with proportion, with lineage. The staff was a symbol of connection, from sky to hand, from hand to earth, from earth to the unseen. It was held vertically because that is how energy flows, not horizontally, but through, down the spine, through the body, into the ground. The staff was the outer expression of an inner current, and only the one who had aligned their own axis could wield the rod without chaos. To hold it meant you had passed trials, you had entered silence, you had stood in darkness and not flinched. Because the rod could not be held by force, it would burn you, or twist, or remain dead in your hand. It had to recognize you. This is why only initiates held it, only those who had walked the spiral inward and downward and returned. The staff was not a prize, it was a consequence of alignment, of memory, of inner geometry made visible. And when the gods were carved in stone, they were always shown holding it, not to show power, but to show anchoring, that they remembered the axis, and that they were ready to transmit it to those who would dare to remember too. There is a reason power is drawn as a line, not a triangle, not a square, but a vertical axis rising, reaching, descending, the staff. The straight rod is not just shape, it is geometry in command, the simplest form and the most profound, a single direction, a declaration, as above, so below. The ancients knew that geometry was not invention, it was revelation. They didn't design shapes, they discovered them. They mirrored what the cosmos already encoded. And of all shapes, the line was sacred, because it connected, not just points but worlds. The rod in the hand of the god was this principle made visible, the center line of the universe, the spine of creation, the axis mundi. It is the line that pierces the veil, that anchors sky to stone, that allows heaven to speak through form. This is why gods are shown standing still, rod in hand, not to move through space, but to stabilize it. Because power is not movement, power is alignment. The rod is not bent, it is exact, calm, charged, like the stillness at the center of a storm, like the eye in the pyramid, like the spine in meditation. This is sacred geometry, form as function and function as meaning. In Egypt, the Wa's scepter always curved slightly at the top, a subtle hook to capture unseen forces. The bottom pierced the ground, a trinity, sky, hand, earth, no part ornamental, all parts engineered. Because to hold the rod was to become a conduit, to receive, to transmit, to embody. And the rod responded to intention. It could bless, it could curse, it could point, and the world would answer. Because it was not wood or metal alone, it was pattern. And the pattern obeyed only one law: resonance. The bearer had to vibrate in tune with the geometry. Any discord and the rod would remain inert, a symbol, not a power. This is why rods were not given lightly. They were passed from master to initiate, from god to king, from seer to soul. Because geometry cannot be faked. You either align or you do not. And when you do, when your breath flows like current, when your spine stands like the world axis, when your silence hums with precision, you don't hold the rod, you become it. And the world begins to listen. The staff was never just wood. It was signal. Because the ancients did not divide the world into physical and spiritual. To them, all things were frequency, all things vibration, alignment, and transmission. And the staff was an antenna, not in metaphor and function. To hold, it was to connect, to tune in, to broadcast. It reached upward to the stars and downward to the earth's core, a conductor of divine current, channeling what the eye could not see. We think of technology as something new, but the ancients had technology energetic, intuitive, sacred. They worked with fields, harmonics, and direction. They understood that form attracts force, that shape creates effect, and the staff was shaped to channel. Carved to precise lengths, inlaid with crystals, wrapped in metals, crowned with orbs, rings, animals, each a glyph of function. In Egyptian temples, priests used rods of copper and zinc balanced in both hands to open meridians, to tune the body to cosmic rhythm. These were not props, they were tools of frequency control. In Vedic rituals, the danda, the rod, was held during mantra. Why? Because vibration needed direction. The sound traveled through the rod like a guided beam. An offering, shaped by will, extended through geometry. And the gods? They did not need words. Their staff was the word. A line drawn in air that told the cosmos, now I speak, now I move energy, now I anchor law. The staff did not generate power, it aligned it. Like a tuning fork, it brought the bearer into harmony with greater fields, the Earth's magnetic pulse, the grid of ley lines, the hum of planetary breath. And once aligned, it amplified. Thought became command, gesture became gateway, presence became pressure. Because the staff conducted essence, and the bearer had to be clear, centered, resonant, or the signal would distort. This is why only the initiated could wield one, not because of rank, but because of readiness. They had emptied, they had attuned, they had become vessels. And so, when they raised the staff, the world responded. Winds shifted, waters moved, crowds silenced. Reality bent not to the will of the person, but to the geometry they had become. The ancients did not worship rods. They used them as bridges, as blueprints, as ancient antennas between the inner and the infinite. And in the silence of those who remember, they still hum, waiting. When the gods held their staffs, they often shared them with something ancient, something coiled, something watching. The serpent. Not as enemy, but as companion, as force, winding itself around the vertical axis, rising, flowing upward in a spiral of power and intention. This was no accident. The serpent on the staff was the secret made visible, because the ancients knew the serpent is not just a creature, it is a pattern, a current, a symbol of energy that moves through the body and the world in the same geometry. Coiled at the base, awakened through will, rising through the spine or the staff to meet heaven. In Egypt, the uraeus, the sacred cobra, emerged from the pharaoh's brow, not for decoration but as proof. The inner fire had risen. The serpent had awakened. He had become the rod. In Greece, Hermes held the caduceus, two serpents spiraling up a staff, crowned by wings, often mistaken as a medical symbol today, but originally it meant something deeper. The union of duality, left and right, feminine and masculine, energy flowing up the spinal column through Ida and Pingala, merging at the crown. This was not mythology, it was a map of the human body, a map of consciousness. The staff was the spine, the serpent the rising force, the wings the awakened state. Every mystery school taught it differently, but all pointed to the same thing. The serpent was life itself, asleep at the base, awaiting your call. In Mesoamerican lore, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, descended from the sky, bearing knowledge and order, not slithering in deception, but soaring in transformation. Because the serpent is not evil, it never was. Only misunderstood. Because it sheds, because it strikes, because it cannot be tamed. But it also guards treasure. It watches over the deep. It moves in silence and speaks in symbols. To wrap a serpent around a staff was to say, power lives here, but only if you are ready. Because the serpent rises only for the one who is clear, who has faced the shadow, who walks the line with humility. Otherwise, it coils tighter. It sleeps. But for the one who remembers, the staff becomes the spine. The serpent becomes the current, and the self becomes the bridge. Not between myth and history, but between earth and sky. There is something timeless about a figure standing still, a staff in hand, a circle of silence around them, and the air vibrating. This is not theater, it is ritual. Because the rod was not only for kings and gods, it was a tool of magic. In ancient rites, to hold the staff was to speak to the invisible, to mark space, to channel force, to summon that which responds to pattern and will. The magician's rod was not an accessory, it was an extension of intention. Vertical, grounded, pointed not at the sky or the earth, but through both. In Egyptian temples, high priests traced symbols in the air using staffs tipped with crystal or gold. These were not flourishes, they were inscriptions encoded in motion, invisible geometry that vibrated through the ether. The movement of the rod shaped the field. To draw a circle was to open a boundary. To strike the ground was to awaken presence. To raise it was to call descent of energy, of spirit, of alignment. In Druidic traditions, the oak staff was cut at a precise time, with sacred chants whispered as it fell, because its birth mattered. The wood retained memory. The rod had to be alive. Its presence sanctified the space. It declared, "This is no longer ordinary ground." The staff was also protection. It grounded the body during ritual, anchoring the practitioner between forces that otherwise could overwhelm. Because true magic is not safe, it is movement through thresholds, and the rod was your line of connection. In tantric rites, the danda, the yogi's staff, was carried as symbol of spiritual authority, not external authority, but mastery of the self. It was said that no one could lift the danda until they had stilled the serpent within. In Hermetic circles, the staff marked the 4 directions. It was planted in the center of ritual space, a pillar of balance around which all energies turned. To break a staff was to end a rite. To drop it was to signal failure. To raise it was to claim the right to command reality. Not through dominance, but through harmony. Because the staff does not force, it aligns. And once aligned, the world obeys not you, but the geometry you carry. This is why initiates were trained to hold the staff without shaking, to walk with it without sound, to sleep with it beside them so that it became a part of their energy field. They were taught to listen to the staff, because when attuned, it whispered, guided, warned. It was not a tool, it was a partner. One that reminded you, you are not casting spells, you are becoming the point of intersection between heaven and earth. Every temple had a center, every city a navel, every world tree rose from a single unseen point. The ancients called it many names: the cosmic pillar, the world axis, the staff of heaven. But at its heart, it was the same thing. Axis mundi, the invisible rod that connects all things. And when the gods held their staffs, they weren't holding weapons. They were holding a replica of the axis itself. The staff was a miniature cosmos, a portable version of what held the world together. In myth, it rose as the world tree Yggdrasil in Norse lore, its branches in the heavens, its roots in the underworld. In Vedic cosmology, it was Mount Meru, the golden mountain at the center of all existence. In Egypt, it was the Jad pillar, symbol of stability and spiritual backbone. And in every case, it stood vertical, unmoving, perfectly aligned between the realms. Heaven above, earth below, soul in between. This wasn't poetic, it was functional. Because the ancients believed that energy follows structure. Where form is precise, energy flows freely. And so they carved their staffs with sacred ratios, placed their temples along ley lines, built their towers to match the stars. Why? Because the axis wasn't just a symbol, it was a channel, a flow of information, memory, intention, a ladder for ascent, a cord for descent, a beam of light masked in myth. And the staff was a way to align the self with that flow. To carry the rod was to say, I stand at the center, I bridge the 3 worlds, I remember the line. In ritual, the initiate would plant the staff into the earth not as gesture, but as connection, to call the axis down into form, to become the center point between opposites. And when that connection was real, not imagined, not mimicked, but felt, something ancient would stir. The body would straighten, the breath would deepen, the spine would hum. Because you are a living staff, a vertical line of water and electricity, a column of light, remembering how to hold the world in stillness. Your spine is your axis, your breath is your carrier wave, your consciousness the fire that rises. And when the geometry of your being aligns with the geometry of the earth, you become the temple. This was the science we lost, the science of silence, of verticality, of stillness that transmits more than any motion ever could. The staff was not power, it was reminder that every one of us carries the axis, that every one of us is capable of holding the line, of becoming the still point in a world of noise. The rod was never forgotten, only hidden, buried not in sand but in symbol. It faded from hands and waited in dreams. And now, in this strange age of electricity and exile, the staff begins to return, not always in wood or gold, not in the grip of gods, but in subtle ways, in symbols, in architecture, in the way the spine straightens when a soul remembers. You see it in the rise of the vertical, in the towers we build, in the breathwork we rediscover, in the meditation postures that mirror the old geometry. You feel it in your own body, the current that wants to move upward, the pull to align, to stand still, to center. This is not nostalgia, it is return. The staff is rising again, not in the hands of rulers, but in the consciousness of the seeker. Because the new initiate is not crowned by empire, they are crowned by presence, and the rod they carry is internal. Their words align, their actions transmit. Their body becomes a conductor of clarity, of coherence, of calm. The staff appears again in dreams, in visions, in synchronicities. It whispers through language, column of light, pillar of breath, spine of the soul. It re-emerges in art, in sound, in the sudden stillness that descends when a moment becomes sacred. Because we are remembering, not the rituals alone, but the principle. That power is not control, it is alignment, that the rod does not dominate, it channels. And it channels through those who are silent enough to listen, still enough to feel, clear enough to carry. The rod does not ask for followers, it asks for carriers. People who walk like the staff stands, who speak like the axis flows, who remember that the vertical is not a path out, but a way in. So look again at the old depictions, at the gods and their staffs, at the serpents that rise, at the hands that hold the line. They were not showing off, they were telling you something. That you too are a channel, a bridge, a rod in human form. And that the moment you remember the line within breath, within body, within soul, you no longer need to hold the staff, because you have become it.